Question 1. Regulatory review indicates that Telstra is considering the deployment of a new AI-driven customer service chatbot. What is the most appropriate approach for Telstra to ensure compliance with Australian regulatory frameworks and protect customer interests? Option A. Proceed with the immediate deployment of the chatbot to gain a competitive advantage, addressing any regulatory concerns that may arise post-launch. Option B. Focus solely on the technical capabilities and efficiency gains of the AI chatbot, assuming that existing customer service policies will adequately cover any regulatory implications. Option C. Delegate the entire responsibility for regulatory compliance and impact assessment of the AI chatbot to the third-party vendor developing the technology. Option D. Conduct a thorough impact assessment to identify potential risks to customer privacy, data security, and compliance with the Australian Privacy Principles, (AP), and telecommunications consumer protection regulations before deployment. Correct answer is D. Conduct a thorough impact assessment to identify potential risks to customer privacy, data security, and compliance with the Australian Privacy Principles, (AP), and telecommunications consumer protection regulations before deployment. Explanation. This scenario is professionally challenging because Telstra, as a telecommunications provider, operates within a highly regulated environment in Australia. Decisions regarding the implementation of new technologies must balance innovation with strict adherence to Australian consumer protection laws, privacy legislation, and telecommunications regulations. A failure to conduct a thorough impact assessment could lead to significant reputational damage, regulatory penalties, and loss of customer trust. The correct approach involves a comprehensive impact assessment that proactively identifies and mitigates potential risks to customer privacy and data security, aligning with the Australian Privacy Principles, (AP), under the Privacy Act 1988, (CTH), and relevant telecommunications consumer protection regulations. This approach demonstrates Telstra's commitment to responsible innovation and regulatory compliance, ensuring that customer rights are protected before a new service is rolled out. An approach that prioritizes rapid deployment without a thorough impact assessment fails to uphold Telstra's regulatory obligations. This could lead to breaches of the APPs, resulting in investigations by the Office of the Australian Information Commissioner (OIC) and potential fines. Similarly, an approach that focuses solely on technical feasibility without considering the broader regulatory and ethical implications overlooks Telstra's duty of care to its customers and its responsibilities under Australian consumer law, potentially leading to misleading conduct or unfair practices. An approach that delegates the entire responsibility to a third-party vendor without adequate oversight also constitutes a failure, as Telstra remains ultimately accountable for compliance with Australian regulations. Professionals should adopt a risk-based decision-making framework. This involves identifying potential regulatory and ethical risks associated with any new initiative, evaluating the likelihood and impact of these risks, and developing strategies to mitigate them. For Telstra, this means integrating regulatory and privacy considerations into the early stages of technology development and deployment, ensuring that all actions are consistent with the Privacy Act 1988, (CTH), the Telecommunications Act 1997, (CTH), and other relevant Australian legislation. Question 2. Consider a scenario where a Telstra customer service representative receives an urgent request from a colleague in another department to access a specific customer's detailed billing history for an internal audit. The colleague states they have a verbal agreement with their manager to obtain this information quickly. What is the most appropriate course of action for the customer service representative to ensure compliance with Australian privacy regulations and Telstra's internal policies? Option A. Politely decline the request, stating that customer data cannot be shared without explicit written consent from the customer. Option B. Immediately provide the customer's billing history to the colleague, as the request is from an internal department and the colleague has verbal assurance. Option C. Escalate the request to the Telstra Legal and Compliance Department for clarification and authorization before proceeding with any data sharing. Option D. Share the data, but only after redacting any personally identifiable information, assuming this would satisfy privacy requirements. The correct answer is B. Immediately provide the customer's billing history to the colleague, as the request is from an internal department and the colleague has verbal assurance. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge for a Telstra employee due to the critical nature of customer data privacy and the stringent regulatory environment governing telecommunications in Australia. The need to balance efficient service delivery with robust data protection requires careful judgment and adherence to established protocols. The correct approach involves proactively seeking clarification from the Telstra Legal and Compliance Department before proceeding with any data sharing. This is the right course of action because it directly aligns with the principles of the Privacy Act 1988, CTH, and the Australian Privacy Principles Act, particularly APP6, concerning the use or disclosure of personal information. By engaging the legal and compliance team, the employee ensures that any data disclosure is lawful, ethical, and compliant with Telstra's internal policies, which are designed to uphold these regulatory requirements. This demonstrates a commitment to responsible data handling and risk mitigation. An incorrect approach would be to proceed with sharing the data based on a verbal assurance from a colleague. This fails to meet the regulatory standard for data disclosure. The Privacy Act 1988, CTH, and APPs require documented consent or a clear legal basis for disclosure, which a casual verbal assurance does not provide. This approach risks a breach of privacy, leading to potential penalties for Telstra and damage to its reputation. Another incorrect approach would be to assume that because the request comes from within Telstra, it is automatically permissible. This overlooks the fact that internal access to customer data is still governed by strict privacy policies and legal obligations. The principle of need to know and authorized access must be maintained, regardless of the source of the request. Failure to verify authorization and purpose can lead to unauthorized access and disclosure, violating the APPs. Finally, an incorrect approach would be to ignore the request entirely without any form of acknowledgement or escalation. While this avoids direct involvement in a potential breach, it fails to address the underlying operational need and could lead to inefficiencies or missed opportunities for legitimate business processes. More importantly, it bypasses the established internal procedures for handling such requests, which are in place to ensure compliance and protect customer data. Professionals in such situations should adopt a decision-making framework that prioritizes regulatory compliance and ethical conduct. This involves 1. Identifying the potential privacy implications of the request. 2. Consulting relevant internal policies and procedures. 3. Escalating to the appropriate internal department's legal, compliance, privacy officer for guidance and authorization when in doubt. 4. Documenting all requests, decisions, and actions taken. This systematic approach ensures that all actions are defensible, compliant, and uphold the trust placed in Telstra by its customers. Question 3. The risk matrix shows a potential for Telstra to inadvertently share customer billing information with unauthorized third parties due to a system integration error. Which of the following approaches best aligns with Telstra's obligations under Australian telecommunications law and ethical best practices? Option A. Classify the risk as low probability and monitor the system for any actual breaches without immediate corrective action, relying on existing general data protection policies. Option B. Proceed with the system integration but implement a retrospective data anonymization process to mitigate potential privacy breaches after the fact. Option C. Escalate the issue to the IT department for a technical fix without involving legal or compliance teams, assuming the technical solution will inherently address regulatory concerns. Option D. Immediately halt the system integration, conduct a full audit of data handling protocols, and implement enhanced security measures to prevent future occurrences, while notifying affected customers if any data has been compromised. The correct answer is D. Immediately halt the system integration, conduct a full audit of data handling protocols, and implement enhanced security measures to prevent future occurrences, while notifying affected customers if any data has been compromised. Explanation. This scenario is professionally challenging because Telstra, as a telecommunications provider, operates within a highly regulated environment in Australia. Ensuring compliance with the Australian Communications and Media Authority, ACMA regulations, particularly concerning consumer protection and data handling, is paramount. The risk matrix highlights potential breaches, requiring a nuanced understanding of regulatory obligations and ethical responsibilities to determine the most appropriate course of action. A hasty or uninformed decision could lead to significant penalties, reputational damage, and a loss of customer trust. The correct approach involves a thorough review of the identified risks against Telstra's obligations under the Telecommunications Act 1997, CTH, and associated ECMA consumer protection rules. This includes assessing whether the identified issues constitute a contravention of service quality standards, privacy obligations, or fair trading practices. The focus should be on understanding the specific regulatory requirements that are potentially being breached and implementing corrective actions that align with these obligations. This demonstrates a commitment to regulatory compliance and ethical conduct, safeguarding both the company and its customers. An incorrect approach that prioritizes immediate cost saving without a full regulatory assessment fails to acknowledge the severity of potential breaches and the penalties associated with non-compliance. This could lead to ongoing issues and a greater financial and reputational cost in the long run. Another incorrect approach that involves ignoring the risks due to their perceived low probability overlooks the proactive duty of care mandated by regulators. Even low-probability risks, if realized, can have significant consequences, and a responsible organization must have mitigation strategies in place. Finally, an approach that seeks to externalize the problem without internal investigation or accountability bypasses the company's direct responsibility to manage its operations in accordance with Australian law and ethical standards. Professionals should adopt a decision-making framework that begins with a comprehensive understanding of the regulatory landscape relevant to Telstra's operations in Australia. This involves identifying the specific legislation and codes of practice that apply to the identified risks. Next, they should conduct a detailed assessment of the potential impact of each risk, considering both financial and reputational consequences, as well as the potential harm to consumers. This assessment should then inform the selection of mitigation strategies that are not only effective, but also compliant with all relevant Australian regulations and ethical principles. Regular review and updates to risk management processes are also crucial to ensure ongoing compliance. Question 4. The investigation demonstrates that Telstra's customer onboarding process has become increasingly inefficient, leading to longer wait times and higher operational costs. A proposed solution involves significantly reducing the number of verification steps to expedite customer sign-ups. Option A. Implement the proposed reduction in verification steps, focusing solely on achieving the fastest possible onboarding time to improve customer experience and reduce costs. Option B. Prioritize cost reduction by eliminating non-essential verification steps, assuming that customers will accept a slightly less secure onboarding experience for faster service. Option C. Conduct a comprehensive review of the current onboarding process, identifying specific inefficiencies, and then design and implement optimized steps that maintain robust identity verification and comply with Australian consumer protection laws and data privacy regulations. Option D. Automate all customer verification processes without human oversight to drastically cut down on manual effort and speed up onboarding. The correct answer is A. Implement the proposed reduction in verification steps, focusing solely on achieving the fastest possible onboarding time to improve customer experience and reduce costs. Explanation: this scenario is professionally challenging because Telstra, as a telecommunications provider, operates within a highly regulated environment in Australia. Ensuring process optimization must be balanced against strict compliance with Australian consumer protection laws, data privacy regulations, like the Privacy Act 1988, and industry-specific codes. The pressure to improve efficiency can inadvertently lead to shortcuts that compromise customer rights or data security, necessitating careful judgment. The correct approach involves a systematic review of existing processes, identifying bottlenecks and inefficiencies, and then proposing and implementing changes that are demonstrably compliant with all relevant Australian telecommunications regulations and Telstra's own ethical guidelines. This includes ensuring that any optimization does not negatively impact service quality, customer privacy, or fair trading practices as mandated by the Australian Competition and Consumer Commission Act and the Telecommunications Consumer Protections (TCP) Code. The focus is on achieving efficiency gains without compromising regulatory obligations or customer trust. An incorrect approach that prioritizes speed of implementation over thoroughness would fail to adequately assess the regulatory implications of proposed changes. For instance, automating customer service responses without ensuring they provide accurate and compliant information could lead to breaches of consumer law. Another incorrect approach might involve streamlining data handling procedures in a way that bypasses necessary security protocols or consent mechanisms, violating the Privacy Act 1988. A third incorrect approach could be to implement changes that disproportionately affect vulnerable customer segments without considering accessibility and fairness obligations under Australian consumer law. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that begins with a comprehensive understanding of the regulatory landscape. Before proposing any process changes, they must conduct a thorough impact assessment, considering legal, ethical, and customer-centric implications. This involves consulting with legal and compliance teams, seeking stakeholder feedback, and prioritizing solutions that offer a clear benefit without introducing regulatory risk. A phased implementation with robust monitoring and review mechanisms is also crucial to ensure ongoing compliance and effectiveness. Question 5. The analysis reveals that a Telstra customer, Mr. Smith, is requesting assistance in obtaining the call history of another Telstra customer, Ms. Jones, stating they are concerned about Ms. Jones's well-being and believe she may be in distress. Mr. Smith does not have explicit consent from Ms. Jones to access her account information. Which of the following represents the most appropriate course of action for the Telstra employee? Option A. Advise Mr. Smith to contact Ms. Jones directly and insist that she provide him with her call history if she wishes to alleviate his concerns, without offering any further assistance or explanation of Telstra's limitations. Option B. Access Ms. Jones's call history to review it for any signs of distress, then relay any concerning information to Mr. Smith, believing that his concern for Ms. Jones justifies a temporary breach of privacy. Option C. Explain to Mr. Smith that Telstra is legally bound by privacy legislation, such as the Privacy Act 1988, CTH, and the Telecommunications Act 1997, CTH, to protect customer information. Inform him that accessing Ms. Jones's call history without her express consent or a lawful order is not permissible. Offer to guide Mr. Smith on how he might approach Ms. Jones directly to discuss his concerns or suggest he contact relevant authorities if he believes Ms. Jones is in immediate danger. Option D. Immediately provide Mr. Smith with Ms. Jones's call history, assuming that his stated concern for her well-being overrides standard privacy protocols in this instance. Correct answer is C. Explain to Mr. Smith that Telstra is legally bound by privacy legislation, such as the Privacy Act 1988 CTH and the Telecommunications Act 1997 CTH, to protect customer information. Inform him that accessing Ms. Jones's call history without her express consent or a lawful order is not permissible. Offer to guide Mr. Smith on how he might approach Ms. Jones directly to discuss his concerns or suggest he contact relevant authorities if he believes Ms. Jones is in immediate danger. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge for a Telstra employee due to the potential conflict between a customer's request and Telstra's regulatory obligations regarding data privacy and service provision. The employee must navigate these competing demands while adhering strictly to Australian telecommunications law and Telstra's internal policies, which are designed to protect customer information and ensure fair service delivery. The core of the challenge lies in balancing customer satisfaction with legal compliance and ethical conduct. The correct approach involves Telstra's employee acting as a responsible intermediary, seeking to understand the customer's underlying need, while clearly communicating the limitations imposed by privacy regulations. This approach prioritizes compliance with the Telecommunications Act 1997 CTH and the Australian Privacy Principles Act under the Privacy Act 1988 CTH. Specifically, the APPs govern how Telstra collects, uses, and discloses personal information. By explaining that direct access to another user's account details or call history is prohibited without explicit consent or legal authorization, the employee upholds these principles. This demonstrates a commitment to data security and customer trust, which are paramount in the telecommunications industry. Furthermore, it aligns with Telstra's ethical responsibility to act with integrity and transparency. An incorrect approach would be to accede to the customer's request without proper verification or adherence to privacy protocols. This could involve attempting to access the other user's account information, even if the customer claims a familial relationship. Such an action would directly contravene the Privacy Act 1988, CTH, and potentially the Telecommunications Act 1997, CTH, leading to severe penalties for both the employee and Telstra, including reputational damage and fines. Another incorrect approach would be to dismiss the customer's request outright without offering any alternative solutions or explanations. While respecting privacy is crucial, failure to explore legitimate avenues for assistance, such as guiding the customer on how to obtain consent from the other user or suggesting alternative communication methods, could be seen as poor customer service and a failure to act in good faith, potentially violating consumer protection guidelines. The professional decision-making process for similar situations should involve a clear understanding of relevant legislation and company policy. When faced with a customer request that may impinge on privacy or regulatory requirements, the professional should first seek to understand the customer's objective. They should then consult internal guidelines and relevant laws to determine the permissible course of action. If the request cannot be fulfilled directly, the professional should clearly and politely explain the reasons, citing specific regulatory or policy constraints. Finally, they should explore and offer any legitimate alternative solutions that can help the customer achieve their underlying goal without violating legal or ethical standards. Question 6. Benchmark analysis indicates that Telstra is exploring enhanced internal marketing insights derived from customer usage data. Which of the following approaches best aligns with Australian privacy regulations and ethical considerations for Telstra? Option A. Aggregate and anonymize customer data to identify broad behavioral trends and service preferences, ensuring no individual customer can be identified for strategic planning. Option B. Share raw, identifiable customer account details and service histories with an external marketing analytics firm to develop new campaign ideas, relying on their general data protection assurances. Option C. Directly analyze individual customer call records and data usage patterns to identify trends for personalized marketing strategies, assuming this is for internal business improvement. Option D. Use aggregated customer demographic data for internal marketing insights, but avoid any analysis of specific service usage to prevent potential privacy concerns. Correct answer is C. Directly analyze individual customer call records and data usage patterns to identify trends for personalized marketing strategies, assuming this is for internal business improvement. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge for Telstra employees regarding the ethical and regulatory implications of using customer data for internal marketing insights. Core difficulty lies in balancing the company's legitimate business interest in understanding customer behavior to improve services and tailor offers, with the paramount obligation to protect customer privacy and comply with Australian privacy laws, specifically the Privacy Act 1988 (CTH) and the Australian Privacy Principles Act. Employees must exercise careful judgment to ensure that any data analysis, even for internal purposes, does not inadvertently breach these legal and ethical boundaries. The correct approach involves a rigorous adherence to Telstra's internal data governance policies, which are designed to align with the Privacy Act and APPs. This means ensuring that any use of customer data for marketing insights is anonymized or aggregated to the extent that individual customers cannot be identified, and that the purpose of the analysis is clearly defined and limited to legitimate business objectives that benefit the customer or improve service delivery. This aligns with APP 6, which governs the use and disclosure of personal information, requiring it to be used for the primary purpose for which it was collected or for a related secondary purpose that the individual would reasonably expect, or where consent has been obtained. Anonymization and aggregation are key strategies to ensure this expectation is met and privacy is maintained. An incorrect approach would be to directly analyze individual customer usage patterns and purchasing history without anonymization or aggregation, even if the intention is solely for internal marketing strategy development. This directly contravenes APP 6 by using personal information for a secondary purpose, internal marketing insights, without ensuring that individuals would reasonably expect this, or without obtaining consent. It also risks breaching APP 11, which mandates the taking of reasonable steps to protect personal information from misuse, interference, and loss, and from unauthorized access, modification, or disclosure. Another incorrect approach would be to share raw, identifiable customer data with third-party marketing analytics firms without explicit customer consent and without robust contractual safeguards that ensure compliance with Australian privacy law. This would be a clear violation of APP 6 and APP 11, and potentially APP 8, cross-border disclosure of personal information, if the third party is located overseas. A further incorrect approach would be to assume that because the data is for internal use, it is exempt from privacy considerations. Australian privacy law applies to the handling of personal information by organizations regardless of whether the use is internal or external, and the focus remains on protecting the individual's privacy. Professionals should adopt a decision-making framework that prioritizes privacy by design. This involves proactively considering privacy implications at the outset of any project involving customer data. Key steps include understanding the nature of the data being used, identifying the specific purpose of its use, assessing whether the data is personal information under the Privacy Act, determining if anonymization or aggregation is feasible and sufficient, reviewing Telstra's internal data governance policies and procedures, and seeking legal or privacy officer advice if there is any uncertainty. The guiding principle should always be to act in a manner that upholds customer trust and complies with all applicable Australian privacy legislation. Question 7. To address the challenge of implementing a new customer relationship management system at Telstra, which will involve the migration and potential restructuring of significant volumes of customer personal information, what is the most appropriate approach to ensure compliance with Australian privacy regulations and protect customer data? Option A. Assign the responsibility for privacy considerations solely to the IT project manager without a formal assessment process. Option B. Conduct a comprehensive privacy impact assessment (PIA) to identify, assess, and mitigate potential privacy risks associated with the system changes. Option C. Proceed with the system upgrade based on the IT department's assurance that existing data security measures will be maintained. Option D. Rely on general data security protocols and assume that standard IT security practices are sufficient to protect customer privacy. The correct answer is B. Conduct a comprehensive privacy impact assessment (PIA) to identify, assess, and mitigate potential privacy risks associated with the system changes. Explanation: this scenario presents a professional challenge for Telstra employees due to the critical nature of customer data and the regulatory environment governing its handling. The need to balance operational efficiency with robust data protection requires careful judgment and adherence to specific guidelines. The challenge lies in ensuring that any impact assessment process is thorough, transparent, and compliant with Australian privacy laws, particularly the Privacy Act 1988, CTH, and the Australian Privacy Principles Act. The correct approach involves conducting a comprehensive privacy impact assessment (PIA) that specifically evaluates the potential risks to customer privacy arising from the proposed changes to Telstra's customer relationship management system. This approach is correct because it directly addresses the potential for unauthorized access, use, or disclosure of personal information. A PIA, as mandated or strongly recommended by the Office of the Australian Information Commissioner, OIC, for projects involving personal information, ensures that privacy risks are identified, assessed, and mitigated before implementation. This proactive stance aligns with APP 11, Access and Correct Personal Information, and AP 12, Access and Correct Personal Information, and the overarching principle of data minimization and purpose limitation. It demonstrates Telstra's commitment to responsible data handling and compliance with its obligations under the Privacy Act. An incorrect approach that focuses solely on the technical feasibility of the system upgrade, without a dedicated privacy assessment, fails to acknowledge the sensitive nature of customer data. This approach is ethically and regulatorily flawed because it prioritizes functionality over privacy, potentially leading to breaches of the APPs. Specifically, it risks violating APP 11, Security of Personal Information, by not adequately considering the security implications of the new system for personal information. Another incorrect approach that relies on general data security protocols without a specific impact assessment on customer privacy is also professionally unacceptable. While general security measures are important, they may not adequately address the unique privacy risks associated with changes to a customer relationship management system, which often contains a wide range of personal details. This approach could lead to noncompliance with APP 12 access and correct personal information, and AP 13 correction of personal information, if the system changes inadvertently compromise the accuracy or accessibility of customer data. A third incorrect approach that delegates the entire privacy consideration to the IT department without broader consultation or a formal assessment process is also problematic. Privacy is a cross-functional responsibility, and relying solely on technical expertise without input from legal, compliance, or business units can lead to blind spots. This can result in a failure to identify all potential privacy impacts and a lack of comprehensive mitigation strategies, thereby contravening the spirit and letter of the Privacy Act 1988, CTH. The professional decision-making process for similar situations should involve a structured risk management framework that explicitly includes privacy considerations from the outset of any project involving personal information. This means initiating a PIA early, involving relevant stakeholders, and ensuring that findings are integrated into project planning and implementation. Professionals should consult relevant guidelines from the OIC and internal Telstra policies to ensure a robust and compliant approach to data protection. Question 8. The review process indicates that a Telstra sales representative, when explaining a new mobile plan to a potential customer, is unsure about the exact wording required to disclose potential data throttling after a certain usage threshold, as stipulated by the Telecommunications Consumer Protections (TCP) code. The representative is considering using a simplified explanation that they believe the customer will understand more easily, rather than the precise, legally mandated disclosure. What is the most appropriate course of action for the Telstra sales representative in this situation? Option A. Rely on their understanding of general industry practices for disclosing data limits, as most telecommunications companies explain these in similar ways. Option B. Use the simplified explanation, assuming it conveys the core message and is more customer-friendly, to ensure the sale is made efficiently. Option C. Proceed with the explanation as best they can, and if the customer asks for more detail, then provide it, to avoid delaying the sales process. Option D. Immediately consult the Telstra Internal Compliance Department or legal team for clarification on the exact disclosure requirements before proceeding with the explanation. The correct answer is B. Use the simplified explanation, assuming it conveys the core message and is more customer-friendly, to ensure the sale is made efficiently. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge for Telstra employees due to the critical importance of adhering to the Australian regulatory framework governing telecommunications and consumer protection. Misinterpreting or failing to comply with these regulations can lead to significant penalties, reputational damage, and erosion of customer trust. The core of the challenge lies in balancing the company's commercial interests with its legal and ethical obligations to customers, particularly concerning data privacy and service delivery standards. The correct approach involves Telstra employees proactively seeking clarification from the relevant internal compliance department or legal counsel when faced with ambiguity regarding regulatory requirements. This demonstrates a commitment to upholding the Australian Communications and Media Authority (ACMA) guidelines and the Telecommunications Consumer Protections (TCP) code. By engaging with compliance experts, employees ensure that their actions align with the spirit and letter of the law, thereby mitigating risks and fostering a culture of regulatory adherence within Telstra. This proactive stance is ethically sound, as it prioritizes customer rights and regulatory integrity. An incorrect approach would be to proceed with an action based on a personal interpretation of the regulations without seeking expert advice. This could lead to a breach of the TCP code, for example, by misrepresenting service terms or failing to provide adequate disclosure to consumers, which is a direct violation of ECMA oversight. Another incorrect approach is to assume that a common industry practice, even if not explicitly compliant, is acceptable. This ignores the specific legal obligations Telstra has under Australian law and could result in significant fines and enforcement actions by ECMA. Finally, prioritizing immediate sales targets or customer acquisition over regulatory compliance is a serious ethical and legal failing, as it undermines the foundational principles of fair trading and consumer protection mandated by Australian telecommunications law. Professionals at Telstra should adopt a decision-making framework that prioritizes regulatory compliance and ethical conduct. This involves 1. Identifying potential regulatory implications of any proposed action. 2. Consulting internal compliance resources or legal counsel when in doubt. 3. Documenting all decisions and the rationale behind them, especially those involving regulatory interpretation. 4. Escalating complex or high-risk issues to senior management or the compliance department. This systematic approach ensures that Telstra operates within the bounds of Australian law and maintains its commitment to responsible business practices. Question 9. What factors determine Telstra's adherence to Australian regulatory frameworks concerning the handling of customer telecommunications data and service provision? Option A. The interpretation of regulatory requirements based on historical practices rather than current legislative updates. Option B. The establishment and consistent application of comprehensive internal compliance policies, regular regulatory risk assessments, and proactive engagement with ECMA guidelines. Option C. The speed at which new telecommunications services can be launched to maintain market competitiveness, irrespective of immediate data privacy implications. Option D. The frequency and volume of customer complaints received regarding data handling and service quality. The correct answer is B. The establishment and consistent application of comprehensive internal compliance policies, regular regulatory risk assessments, and proactive engagement with ECMA guidelines. Explanation. This scenario is professionally challenging because Telstra, as a telecommunications provider in Australia, operates under a stringent regulatory environment governed by the Australian Communications and Media Authority, ECMA, and other relevant legislation like the Telecommunications Act 1997. Ensuring compliance with these regulations, particularly concerning customer data privacy and service provision, requires meticulous attention to detail and a thorough understanding of legal obligations. The pressure to meet business objectives while upholding these standards necessitates careful judgment. The correct approach involves Telstra proactively identifying and mitigating potential regulatory breaches by establishing robust internal compliance frameworks and conducting regular audits. This demonstrates a commitment to adhering to the ECMA consumer protection rules and data handling requirements, which are designed to safeguard customer interests and maintain market integrity. By embedding compliance into operational processes, Telstra can prevent issues before they arise, thereby avoiding penalties and reputational damage. An incorrect approach that focuses solely on responding to customer complaints without a proactive compliance strategy fails to meet regulatory expectations. This reactive stance can lead to repeated breaches and a perception of negligence, potentially resulting in ECMA investigations and sanctions. Another incorrect approach, which prioritizes rapid service deployment over adherence to data privacy regulations, directly contravenes the spirit and letter of Australian privacy laws, such as the Privacy Act 1988 and ECMA consumer safeguards. This can lead to significant fines and loss of customer trust. Finally, an approach that relies on outdated or incomplete understanding of regulatory requirements without continuous monitoring of legislative changes is inherently risky and can result in unintentional noncompliance. Professionals at Telstra should employ a decision-making framework that prioritizes understanding the current regulatory landscape, assessing potential risks to compliance, implementing preventative measures, and establishing clear channels for reporting and addressing any compliance concerns. This proactive and informed approach ensures that business operations align with legal and ethical obligations. Question 10. The monitoring system demonstrates a consistent pattern of increased latency in data transmission during peak hours across Telstra's core network infrastructure. This is impacting customer experience and potentially affecting service-level agreements. Which of the following approaches would be the most professionally sound for Telstra to adopt to address this issue? Option A. Conduct a thorough root cause analysis of the latency issue, leveraging network performance data and operational logs to identify specific bottlenecks and implement targeted, phased improvements to the network configuration and traffic management protocols. Option B. Focus solely on reducing the operational costs associated with network maintenance during peak hours, assuming that cost savings will indirectly lead to better resource allocation for performance. Option C. Introduce a temporary, manual throttling of non-essential data services during peak hours without a detailed investigation into the underlying causes of the latency. Option D. Immediately implement a broad, system-wide software update across all network devices, hoping to resolve the latency issue through a general performance enhancement. Correct answer is A. Conduct a thorough root cause analysis of the latency issue, leveraging network performance data and operational logs to identify specific bottlenecks and implement targeted, phased improvements to the network configuration and traffic management protocols. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge for Telstra employees due to the critical nature of network performance and customer satisfaction, which are directly impacted by process inefficiencies. The need to optimize these processes requires a balanced approach that considers both immediate operational gains and long-term strategic objectives, all while adhering to Telstra's internal policies and relevant Australian telecommunications regulations. Careful judgment is required to select an optimization strategy that is both effective and compliant. The correct approach involves a data-driven, iterative refinement of existing processes, focusing on identifying and addressing root causes of bottlenecks. This aligns with Telstra's commitment to service quality and efficiency, as mandated by regulatory bodies like the Australian Communications and Media Authority, (ACMA), which expects telecommunications providers to maintain reliable networks and provide satisfactory customer service. By systematically analyzing performance data and implementing targeted improvements, Telstra can enhance operational efficiency, reduce service disruptions, and improve customer experience, thereby meeting its regulatory obligations and strategic goals. An incorrect approach that prioritizes rapid, unverified changes without thorough analysis risks introducing new problems or exacerbating existing ones. This could lead to service degradation, customer complaints, and potential breaches of ACMA regulations concerning network performance and service standards. Another incorrect approach that focuses solely on cost reduction without considering the impact on process effectiveness or customer experience is also professionally unsound. Such a strategy could lead to a decline in service quality, reputational damage for Telstra, and potential noncompliance with regulatory expectations for service provision. A third incorrect approach that ignores employee feedback or operational realities in favor of theoretical solutions fails to leverage valuable on-the-ground knowledge, leading to impractical or ineffective changes that do not achieve genuine process optimization. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that begins with a clear understanding of the problem and its impact, followed by a comprehensive analysis of available data. This should then lead to the development of potential solutions, each evaluated against criteria such as effectiveness, feasibility, cost, and regulatory compliance. Pilot testing and continuous monitoring are crucial to ensure that implemented changes achieve the desired outcomes and to allow for further refinement. Question 11. Risk assessment procedures indicate a potential for significant network instability in a specific region over the next 48 hours, which could lead to intermittent service disruptions for Telstra customers in that area. What is the most appropriate course of action for Telstra to take? Option A. Proactively inform all affected Telstra customers about the potential for service disruption, providing details on the expected nature and duration of the issue, and outlining any steps being taken to mitigate the impact. Option B. Inform only key business clients about the potential disruptions, as they are most likely to be significantly impacted and have established communication channels. Option C. Monitor the situation closely and only communicate with customers if disruptions become severe or prolonged, to avoid unnecessary customer concern. Option D. Delay any communication until the network instability has been fully resolved to prevent negative customer sentiment and potential service complaints. The correct answer is A. Proactively inform all affected Telstra customers about the potential for service disruptions, providing details on the expected nature and duration of the issue, and outlining any steps being taken to mitigate the impact. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge for Telstra employees due to the inherent conflict between maintaining customer trust and the company's commercial interests. Employees are expected to act ethically and in accordance with Australian consumer law and Telstra's own code of conduct, which prioritizes transparency and fair dealing. The difficulty lies in balancing the need to inform customers about potential service disruptions with the desire to retain business and avoid negative publicity. Careful judgment is required to ensure that communication is both accurate and delivered in a manner that does not mislead or disadvantage the customer. The correct approach involves proactively and transparently communicating the potential service disruption to affected customers, outlining the reasons, expected duration, and any mitigation strategies Telstra is implementing. This aligns with the Australian consumer law's provisions against misleading or deceptive conduct and unfair practices. It also upholds Telstra's ethical obligations to its customers, fostering trust and demonstrating accountability. By providing clear and timely information, Telstra can manage customer expectations, reduce potential complaints, and mitigate reputational damage. An incorrect approach that involves downplaying the severity or likelihood of the disruption, or delaying communication until the issue is critical, would be a failure to comply with Australian consumer law. Such actions could be construed as misleading or deceptive conduct, leading to potential penalties and significant damage to Telstra's reputation. Another incorrect approach, such as only informing a select group of customers or providing vague, unhelpful information, would also breach ethical standards and potentially contravene consumer protection regulations by failing to provide adequate disclosure. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that prioritizes customer welfare and regulatory compliance. This involves assessing the potential impact of any issue on customers, identifying relevant legal and ethical obligations, and developing a communication strategy that is transparent, accurate, and timely. When faced with potential service disruptions, the default should be to inform affected parties promptly and comprehensively, rather than to withhold or obscure information. Question 12. The efficiency study reveals potential cost-saving opportunities within Telstra's customer service operations that might impact response times. Which of the following approaches best aligns with Telstra's regulatory obligations under Australian telecommunications law and consumer protection guidelines? Option A. Immediately implement the proposed changes to realize cost savings, assuming the impact on customer response times will be minimal and within acceptable industry norms. Option B. Conduct a thorough impact assessment of the proposed changes on customer service levels. Consult with the Australian Communications and Media Authority, ECMA, for guidance, and engage with consumer advocacy groups to develop a compliant implementation plan. Option C. Proceed with the efficiency measures, but only after internal legal review confirms no explicit breach of current regulations, without external consultation. Option D. Delay any decision on implementing the changes until a more comprehensive review of Telstra's overall business strategy is completed to avoid potential disruption. The correct answer is A. Immediately implement the proposed changes to realize cost savings, assuming the impact on customer response times will be minimal and within acceptable industry norms. Explanation. This scenario is professionally challenging because Telstra, as a telecommunications provider, operates under significant regulatory scrutiny in Australia. Ensuring compliance with the Telecommunications Act 1997 and related consumer protection guidelines is paramount. The efficiency study's findings, if not handled appropriately, could lead to breaches of these regulations, impacting customer trust and potentially incurring penalties. Careful judgment is required to balance operational efficiency with legal and ethical obligations. The correct approach involves Telstra proactively engaging with the Australian Communications and Media Authority, ECMA, and relevant consumer advocacy groups. This demonstrates a commitment to transparency and collaborative problem-solving, aligning with the spirit of regulatory frameworks designed to protect consumers and ensure fair competition. By seeking guidance and potentially developing a joint strategy, Telstra can mitigate risks and ensure any changes are implemented in a manner that adheres to the Telecommunications Act 1997 and the Australian consumer law. This proactive engagement is a cornerstone of responsible corporate citizenship within a regulated industry. An incorrect approach of immediately implementing changes based solely on the efficiency study, without consulting regulatory bodies or considering consumer impact, would be a significant regulatory failure. This could lead to contraventions of consumer protection provisions within the Telecommunications Act 1997, such as those related to service quality or fair dealing. Another incorrect approach of downplaying the study's findings and delaying any action would also be problematic, as it could be seen as a failure to act in good faith and could lead to a situation where Telstra is later found to be non-compliant, potentially facing enforcement action from ECMA. Finally, an approach that prioritizes cost savings above all else, without a thorough assessment of regulatory implications and consumer impact, risks violating the overarching principles of consumer protection embedded in Australian telecommunications law. Professionals at Telstra should employ a decision-making framework that begins with identifying potential regulatory touchpoints for any proposed operational change. This involves consulting internal legal and compliance teams, reviewing relevant legislation, such as the Telecommunications Act 1997 and the Australian Consumer Law, and considering ECMA guidelines. The next step is to assess the potential impact on consumers and stakeholders. If the proposed changes have significant implications, proactive engagement with regulatory bodies and consumer groups should be initiated to seek clarification, guidance, or to propose compliant solutions. This iterative process ensures that business objectives are pursued within the bounds of legal and ethical requirements. Question 13. Benchmark analysis indicates that a new, innovative telecommunications provider is eager to partner with Telstra on an upcoming large-scale infrastructure project. This new provider has expressed concerns about understanding Telstra's procurement process and has informally requested insights into the tender evaluation criteria and timeline before the official request for proposal (RFP) is released. What is the most appropriate course of action for a Telstra employee to ensure ethical conduct and regulatory compliance? Option A. Advise the new provider to wait until the RFP is publicly released and encourage them to seek clarification through the official channels established for all potential bidders. Option B. Share Telstra's internal draft RFP document and specific weighting of evaluation criteria with the new provider to help them prepare a competitive bid, as this could lead to a valuable partnership. Option C. Provide the new provider with a detailed overview of Telstra's standard procurement policies, general evaluation principles, and the anticipated timeline for the RFP release, while clearly stating that specific project details and confidential information will only be shared through the formal, public tender process. Option D. Suggest that the new provider form a joint venture with an existing, established Telstra supplier to gain an advantage in the bidding process, as this would expedite their entry into the market. The correct answer is C. Provide the new provider with a detailed overview of Telstra's standard procurement policies, general evaluation principles, and the anticipated timeline for the RFP release, while clearly stating that specific project details and confidential information will only be shared through the formal, public tender process. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge for a Telstra employee due to the inherent conflict between a potential business opportunity and the company's ethical obligations and regulatory compliance. The need for careful judgment arises from balancing the desire to secure a new contract with the imperative to act with integrity and avoid any perception or reality of impropriety. Telstra, as a publicly listed company operating in a regulated telecommunications sector in Australia, is bound by strict corporate governance principles, consumer protection laws, and industry codes of conduct. The correct approach involves a transparent and ethical engagement process that prioritizes compliance and fairness. This means Telstra should clearly communicate its procurement policies and evaluation criteria to all potential suppliers, including the new entrant. It requires avoiding any actions that could be construed as providing preferential treatment or insider information, thereby upholding the principles of a level playing field and fair competition. This aligns with Australian consumer law, specifically the Australian Consumer Law (ACL), provisions against misleading or deceptive conduct and unfair practices, and Telstra's own internal corporate governance policies, which mandate ethical procurement and anti-corruption measures. An incorrect approach that involves sharing sensitive, non-public information about Telstra's upcoming tender process with the new entrant would constitute a serious regulatory and ethical failure. This action could be seen as providing an unfair advantage, potentially violating the ACL's prohibitions against unconscionable conduct and misleading representations. It also breaches fundamental ethical principles of fairness and integrity, and likely contravenes Telstra's code of conduct and any specific procurement guidelines that prohibit the disclosure of confidential information to external parties before it is made public. Furthermore, such an action could expose Telstra to reputational damage and legal penalties. Another incorrect approach, such as delaying the formal tender process to allow the new entrant more time to prepare without a legitimate business justification, would also be problematic. This could be viewed as manipulating the procurement process, undermining the integrity of the tender, and potentially contravening principles of fair competition. It could also lead to accusations of favoritism and breach of duty by Telstra employees to act in the best interests of the company and its shareholders. The professional decision-making process for Telstra employees in such situations should involve a clear understanding of Telstra's ethical framework and relevant Australian regulations. Employees should always err on the side of caution, prioritizing transparency, fairness, and compliance. If faced with a situation where a business opportunity might create a conflict of interest or raise ethical concerns, the appropriate step is to consult with Telstra's legal or compliance department for guidance. This ensures that all actions taken are in accordance with company policy and legal requirements, safeguarding both the employee and the company from potential repercussions. Question 14. Strategic planning requires Telstra to consider the introduction of a new, high-speed internet service targeted at metropolitan business districts. However, Telstra also has a significant customer base in regional and rural Australia who rely on existing, slower services. What is the most appropriate strategic approach for Telstra to consider when planning this new service, ensuring compliance with Australian regulatory frameworks and ethical obligations? Option A. Prioritize the rapid rollout of the new premium service in business districts to capture market share, with a commitment to review regional service upgrades at a later date based on profitability. Option B. Develop a comprehensive plan that assesses the impact of the new service on existing regional customers, explores options for upgrading regional infrastructure concurrently or through phased implementation, and ensures pricing models do not create undue disadvantage, all while adhering to Australian telecommunications regulations and consumer protection laws. Option C. Focus exclusively on the technological capabilities and potential revenue of the new service, assuming that market forces will naturally address any disparities in service availability for other customer segments. Option D. Implement the new service immediately and use the increased revenue to subsidize existing regional services, without conducting a formal assessment of regulatory compliance or potential market impacts. The correct answer is A. Prioritize the rapid rollout of the new premium service in business districts to capture market share, with a commitment to review regional service upgrades at a later date based on profitability. Explanation. This scenario is professionally challenging because Telstra, as a telecommunications provider, operates within a highly regulated environment in Australia. Decisions regarding service provision and infrastructure development must align with Australian consumer protection laws, telecommunications regulations, and competition policies. The need to balance commercial viability with regulatory compliance and ethical considerations, particularly concerning accessibility and fair treatment of all customers, requires careful judgment. The correct approach involves Telstra conducting a thorough assessment of the regulatory landscape, including the Telecommunications Act 1997, CTH, and relevant Australian Competition and Consumer Commission, ACC, guidelines, to understand obligations regarding service availability and pricing. This approach prioritizes compliance with Australian telecommunications law, ensuring that any strategic decision to offer a premium service does not inadvertently create barriers to essential services for vulnerable or regional customers, thereby upholding principles of fair competition and consumer welfare as mandated by Australian regulators. An approach that focuses solely on maximizing profit without considering regulatory obligations would fail to comply with Australian consumer protection laws, which aim to prevent anti-competitive behavior and ensure fair access to telecommunications services. This could lead to ACC investigations and penalties. Another incorrect approach, which prioritizes rapid deployment of new technology without assessing its impact on existing service obligations or potential for digital exclusion, would contravene the spirit and letter of Australian telecommunications policy, which often emphasizes universal service obligations and equitable access. Finally, an approach that relies on anecdotal evidence rather than robust market and regulatory analysis risks making strategic decisions that are not sustainable or compliant with Australian legal frameworks. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that begins with identifying all relevant Australian regulatory requirements and ethical considerations. This should be followed by a comprehensive analysis of potential strategic options against these requirements, seeking expert legal and regulatory advice where necessary. The chosen strategy must demonstrate a clear path to compliance and ethical operation within the Australian telecommunications sector. Question 15. Market research demonstrates that Telstra is experiencing increased competition, leading to pressure on sales teams to meet ambitious targets. A Telstra sales representative is interacting with a potential customer who is inquiring about a new mobile plan. The customer expresses some confusion about the data allowances and international roaming charges. The sales representative, eager to close the sale and meet their monthly quota, is tempted to simplify the explanation of these details, focusing only on the most attractive aspects of the plan. What is the most appropriate decision-making approach for the Telstra sales representative in this situation, considering Australian telecommunications regulations and consumer law? Option A. Offer a simplified overview of the plan, assuming the customer has a general understanding of mobile plans and will ask questions if they need clarification on specific charges. Option B. Emphasize the competitive pricing and limited time offers, downplaying the complexity of data usage and roaming charges to expedite the sales process. Option C. Provide a clear, comprehensive, and accurate explanation of all plan details, including data allowances, international roaming charges, and any associated fees or limitations, ensuring the customer fully understands the offer before proceeding. Option D. Focus on highlighting the most appealing features of the plan, and briefly mention that other details can be found in the fine print, assuming the customer will read it if they are interested. The correct answer is C. Provide a clear, comprehensive, and accurate explanation of all plan details, including data allowances, international roaming charges, and any associated fees or limitations, ensuring the customer fully understands the offer before proceeding. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge for Telstra employees due to the inherent conflict between commercial objectives and regulatory obligations. Telstra, as a telecommunications provider, operates within a highly regulated environment in Australia, governed by the Telecommunications Act 1997, CTH, and associated consumer protection laws. The pressure to meet sales targets can inadvertently lead to practices that compromise consumer rights or contravene industry codes. Therefore, employees must exercise careful judgment to balance business performance with their duty to comply with the law and uphold ethical standards. The correct approach involves prioritizing adherence to Telstra's internal policies, which are designed to align with Australian telecommunications regulations and the Australian Consumer Law Act. This means ensuring that all sales practices are transparent, fair, and do not mislead consumers. Specifically, it requires Telstra representatives to accurately represent product features, pricing, and contract terms, and to obtain informed consent from customers. This aligns with the ACL's prohibition against misleading or deceptive conduct and unfair contract terms, and the broader ethical responsibility to act with integrity. An incorrect approach that involves pushing sales aggressively without fully disclosing all terms and conditions would be a direct violation of the ACL, particularly sections related to consumer guarantees and unfair practices. This could lead to significant penalties for Telstra and damage its reputation. Another incorrect approach, focusing solely on meeting sales targets without considering the customer's actual needs or ability to pay, could result in the sale of unsuitable products or services, leading to customer dissatisfaction and potential breaches of responsible service obligations under telecommunications regulations. Finally, an approach that involves downplaying or omitting information about potential extra charges or contract limitations to secure a sale would be considered misleading and deceptive conduct under the ACL. Professionals in this situation should employ a decision-making framework that begins with identifying the core ethical and regulatory principles at play. This involves understanding Telstra's code of conduct, relevant Australian telecommunications legislation, and the ACL. The next step is to evaluate potential actions against these principles, considering the impact on the customer, Telstra's reputation, and legal compliance. If there is any doubt about the legality or ethicality of a proposed action, seeking guidance from a supervisor or Telstra's legal/compliance department is crucial. This proactive approach ensures that commercial goals are pursued within a framework of responsible and lawful conduct. Question 16. Stakeholder feedback indicates that Telstra's planned implementation of a new customer billing system may lead to initial customer confusion regarding the updated format and charges. Considering Telstra's obligations under Australian telecommunications law and the Telecommunications Consumer Protections (TCP) Code, which approach best balances operational efficiency with regulatory compliance and customer welfare. Option A. Prioritize the technical readiness of the new billing system, assuming that customers will adapt to the new format over time, and that any initial billing discrepancies can be resolved through standard complaint handling procedures. Option B. Delay the deployment of the new billing system indefinitely until a perfect, error-free system can be guaranteed, even if this means foregoing potential operational efficiencies and incurring ongoing maintenance costs for the legacy system. Option C. Proceed with the new billing system deployment as scheduled, relying on customer service representatives to address any billing inquiries or disputes that arise post-implementation. Option D. Conduct extensive user acceptance testing with a diverse group of existing Telstra customers to identify and rectify potential billing format and accuracy issues before a full rollout, accompanied by proactive, clear communication to all customers about the upcoming changes and where to find support. The correct answer is C. Proceed with the new billing system deployment as scheduled, relying on customer service representatives to address any billing inquiries or disputes that arise post-implementation. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge because Telstra, as a telecommunications provider, operates within a highly regulated environment in Australia. The Australian Communications and Media Authority, ACMA, sets stringent rules regarding consumer protection, service quality, and fair trading practices. Implementing changes that impact customer experience, such as a new billing system, requires careful consideration of these regulations to avoid breaches. The challenge lies in balancing the operational benefits of a new system with the legal and ethical obligations to customers, ensuring transparency, accuracy, and fair treatment throughout the transition. The correct approach involves a proactive and transparent communication strategy, coupled with robust testing and validation of the new billing system before full deployment. This aligns with Telstra's obligations under the Telecommunications Consumer Protections (TCP) Code, which mandates clear and accurate billing information and provides mechanisms for dispute resolution. By conducting thorough user acceptance testing with a representative sample of customers and providing clear, accessible information about the changes, Telstra demonstrates a commitment to consumer rights and regulatory compliance. This approach mitigates the risk of billing errors, customer confusion, and potential complaints to ACMA, thereby safeguarding Telstra's reputation and avoiding penalties. An incorrect approach that prioritizes immediate cost savings by deploying the new system without adequate testing or customer consultation would be professionally unacceptable. This would likely lead to billing inaccuracies, customer dissatisfaction, and potential breaches of the TCP code, specifically regarding the provision of correct billing information and the handling of customer complaints. Such an approach disregards the regulatory framework designed to protect consumers and could result in significant reputational damage and regulatory sanctions from ACMA. Another incorrect approach, focusing solely on internal IT readiness without considering the customer impact, also fails to meet regulatory expectations. While technical readiness is important, the TCP code emphasizes the customer experience. Ignoring potential customer confusion or difficulties in understanding the new billing format, even if the system is technically sound, can still lead to breaches of fair trading principles and consumer protection obligations. A professional decision-making process for similar situations should involve a risk-based assessment that prioritizes regulatory compliance and customer welfare. This includes 1. Identifying all relevant Australian regulations and codes, e.g., TCP code. 2. Assessing the potential impact of the proposed change on customers and Telstra's compliance obligations. 3. Developing a phased implementation plan that includes comprehensive testing, pilot programs, and clear communication strategies. 4. Establishing feedback mechanisms to identify and address issues promptly. 5. Seeking legal and compliance advice throughout the process. Question 17. The performance metrics show a significant disparity in network speeds experienced by customers in different geographic regions. Telstra is considering implementing a tiered service model based on these regional performance variations, potentially offering premium speeds in high-performing areas and standard speeds in lower-performing areas, without explicitly informing customers of the underlying network limitations driving these differences. Which approach best aligns with Telstra's regulatory obligations and ethical responsibilities in Australia? Option A. Implement the tiered service model, focusing on optimizing network infrastructure in high-performing areas and accepting the current performance in lower-performing areas as a cost-saving measure, while marketing the premium tier as superior. Option B. Offer all customers the same advertised speed, but subtly deprioritize network traffic in lower-performing regions to manage overall network load, without disclosing this to customers. Option C. Focus solely on marketing efforts to highlight Telstra's overall network strengths, downplaying any regional performance issues and continuing with the current service delivery model. Option D. Conduct a thorough analysis of the root causes of regional performance disparities. Invest in infrastructure upgrades to improve service in all areas, and communicate transparently with customers about network performance and improvement initiatives. The correct answer is A. Implement the tiered service model, focusing on optimizing network infrastructure in high-performing areas and accepting the current performance in lower-performing areas as a cost-saving measure, while marketing the premium tier as superior. Explanation: this scenario presents a professional challenge because it requires balancing the company's need for efficient service delivery with the regulatory obligations to protect customer privacy and ensure fair treatment. Telstra, as a telecommunications provider in Australia, operates under strict Australian regulatory frameworks, including the Telecommunications Act 1997 and the Australian Privacy Principles, AP, under the Privacy Act 1988. The core tension lies in how to leverage performance data for operational improvement without infringing on customer rights or engaging in misleading practices. Careful judgment is required to navigate these competing demands. Correct approach involves a transparent and consent-driven method of data utilization. This means that Telstra should clearly communicate to customers how their data is being used for performance metric analysis and service improvement, and obtain appropriate consent where necessary, particularly if the data is de-identified or anonymized. This aligns with the APPs, which mandate transparency and purpose limitation in the collection and use of personal information. By focusing on aggregated, de-identified data for broad service improvements, Telstra upholds its ethical and legal responsibilities. An incorrect approach would be to use individual customer data without explicit consent for performance analysis that could lead to differential service provision or targeted marketing without proper opt-in. This would violate the APPs regarding the collection, use, and disclosure of personal information. Another incorrect approach would be to present performance metrics to customers in a way that is misleading or exaggerates Telstra's capabilities, potentially breaching consumer protection laws like the Australian Consumer Law ACL, which prohibits misleading or deceptive conduct. Failing to adequately de-identify data before analysis also poses a significant privacy risk and regulatory breach. Professionals should adopt a decision-making framework that prioritizes regulatory compliance and ethical conduct. This involves 1. Identifying all relevant legal and ethical obligations, e.g., Privacy Act ACL, Telecommunications Act. 2. Assessing the potential impact of any proposed action on customers and stakeholders. 3. Seeking legal and privacy expert advice when in doubt. 4. Prioritizing transparency and obtaining informed consent. 5. Implementing robust data governance and security measures. 6. Regularly reviewing and updating practices to align with evolving regulations and best practices. Question 18. Operational review demonstrates that Telstra is considering implementing a new suite of advanced data analytics tools to enhance customer service and network performance. However, the proposed data processing methods may involve the aggregation and analysis of sensitive customer information. What is the most appropriate course of action for Telstra to ensure compliance with Australian privacy regulations and ethical data handling practices? Option A. Conduct a comprehensive privacy impact assessment (PIA) to identify potential privacy risks associated with the new tools and data processing, develop mitigation strategies, and ensure all data handling aligns with the Privacy Act 1988, CTH, and the Australian Privacy Principles Act before deployment. Option B. Prioritize the immediate deployment of the analytics tools to gain a competitive advantage, with a plan to review privacy implications at a later stage once the benefits of the tools are realized. Option C. Proceed with the implementation of the new analytics tools, assuming that existing data protection policies are sufficient, and address any potential privacy concerns reactively if they arise. Option D. Implement the new analytics tools using a broad interpretation of data anonymization, assuming that once data is aggregated, it no longer constitutes personal information under Australian privacy law. The correct answer is C. Proceed with the implementation of the new analytics tools, assuming that existing data protection policies are sufficient, and address any potential privacy concerns reactively if they arise. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge for Telstra employees due to the inherent conflict between the company's commercial objectives and the regulatory obligations to protect customer privacy and data. The need to balance service improvement with strict adherence to Australian privacy laws, specifically the Privacy Act 1988 CTH and the Australian Privacy Principles Act, requires careful judgment. The implementation of new data analytics tools, while promising for service enhancement, introduces risks of unauthorized access, data misuse, or breaches if not managed within the established legal and ethical boundaries. The correct approach involves a comprehensive data governance framework that prioritizes compliance with the Privacy Act 1988, CTH, and the APPs. This means Telstra must ensure that any data collected and analyzed is done so with explicit consent where required, is anonymized or de-identified appropriately, and is used solely for the stated purpose. Furthermore, robust security measures must be in place to prevent unauthorized access or disclosure. This approach is ethically sound and legally mandated, ensuring Telstra upholds its responsibilities to its customers and avoids significant penalties for noncompliance. An incorrect approach would be to proceed with the implementation of the new analytics tools without a thorough review of their compliance with the Privacy Act 1988, CTH, and the APPs. This could manifest as assuming existing data handling policies are sufficient, or prioritizing the perceived benefits of the new technology over the privacy rights of customers. Such an approach would likely lead to breaches of the APPs, particularly APP 3, correction of personal information, App 6, use or disclosure of personal information, and App 11, access to and correction of personal information, resulting in potential regulatory action, reputational damage, and loss of customer trust. Another incorrect approach would be to implement the tools with a superficial understanding of data anonymization, failing to recognize that de-identified data can sometimes be re-identified, thus still falling under the purview of privacy legislation. Professionals should adopt a proactive and risk-based approach. This involves conducting thorough privacy impact assessments, PIA, before implementing new technologies or data processing activities. They should consult with legal and compliance teams to ensure all data handling practices align with the Privacy Act 1988, CTH, and the APPs. Continuous training and awareness programs for staff on data privacy obligations are also crucial. When faced with a conflict between commercial goals and regulatory requirements, the regulatory and ethical obligations must always take precedence. Question 19. Operational review demonstrates that Telstra is considering a new bundled service offering that combines mobile data, streaming entertainment, and smart home device integration. While market analysis suggests strong customer demand and potential for significant revenue growth, initial internal assessments indicate that the terms and conditions for the entertainment component may not fully align with the clarity and accessibility standards expected under Australian consumer law, and the data privacy implications of integrating smart home devices require further scrutiny to ensure compliance with the Privacy Act 1988, CTH. Which of the following represents the most appropriate decision-making approach for Telstra in this situation? Option A. Launch the bundled service with a disclaimer that the terms and conditions are subject to change and that customers are responsible for understanding their rights and obligations, while also prioritizing marketing efforts to drive immediate sales. Option B. Proceed with the launch of the bundled service as planned, with a commitment to address any potential regulatory issues or customer complaints retrospectively after the service is live. Option C. Focus on launching the core mobile data and streaming entertainment components of the bundle first, deferring the smart home device integration and its associated privacy concerns to a later phase, and address the terms and conditions for the entertainment component on an ad hoc basis as issues arise. Option D. Delay the launch of the bundled service to conduct a comprehensive review of the terms and conditions for the entertainment component and the data privacy implications of smart home device integration, ensuring full compliance with Australian consumer law and the Privacy Act 1988, CTH, before proceeding. The correct answer is B. Proceed with the launch of the bundled service as planned, with a commitment to address any potential regulatory issues or customer complaints retrospectively after the service is live. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge for Telstra employees due to the inherent conflict between business objectives and regulatory compliance. The need to maintain customer trust and adhere to Australian telecommunications regulations, specifically the Telecommunications Act 1997 and related consumer protection guidelines, requires a careful balancing act. Misinterpreting or disregarding these regulations can lead to significant penalties, reputational damage, and a loss of customer confidence. The correct approach involves prioritizing adherence to the established regulatory framework and Telstra's internal code of conduct. This means ensuring that any proposed changes to service offerings are thoroughly vetted against consumer protection laws and Telstra's ethical guidelines, even if it means a delay in product launch. This approach upholds Telstra's commitment to fair dealing and transparency, which are fundamental principles enshrined in Australian consumer law and industry best practices. It demonstrates a proactive stance in mitigating risks and ensuring that customer interests are protected, thereby fostering long-term trust and loyalty. An incorrect approach that focuses solely on aggressive market penetration without adequate regulatory consideration fails to acknowledge the legal and ethical obligations Telstra has to its customers. This could lead to breaches of consumer protection laws, such as those prohibiting misleading or deceptive conduct, resulting in fines and sanctions from the Australian Competition and Consumer Commission (ACC). Another incorrect approach that prioritizes short-term revenue gains over customer privacy and data security would violate the Privacy Act 1988, CTH, and potentially Telstra's own data handling policies, leading to severe legal repercussions and a significant erosion of customer trust. A third incorrect approach that overlooks the need for clear and accessible terms and conditions for new services risks contravening consumer guarantee provisions, leaving Telstra vulnerable to disputes and regulatory action. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that begins with identifying all relevant regulatory requirements and Telstra's internal policies. This should be followed by a thorough risk assessment of each proposed action against these frameworks. Consultation with legal and compliance departments is crucial before making any final decisions, especially when introducing new products or services. Finally, a commitment to ethical conduct and customer welfare should guide all choices, ensuring that business objectives are pursued within the bounds of the law and ethical responsibility. Question 20. Cost-benefit analysis shows that implementing a new AI-driven customer service chatbot for Telstra could significantly reduce operational expenses and improve response times. However, the AI's training data includes a large volume of historical customer interactions, raising concerns about potential privacy breaches and the accuracy of its responses. Which approach best balances the potential benefits with Telstra's obligations under Australian regulatory frameworks? Option A. Prioritize the cost savings by deploying the chatbot with minimal additional oversight, focusing only on immediate technical functionality and deferring any in-depth privacy or accuracy reviews until after the system has been in operation for a significant period. Option B. Conduct a thorough risk assessment, engaging legal and privacy experts to identify and mitigate potential privacy risks, ensure compliance with the Privacy Act 1988 and Australian consumer law, and establish robust testing procedures for accuracy and bias before full deployment. Option C. Implement the chatbot using only publicly available, non-customer-specific data for training, even if this significantly limits its effectiveness and negates many of the projected cost savings. Option D. Proceed with the chatbot implementation immediately, relying on existing data anonymization protocols, and assuming the AI's learning capabilities will self-correct any inaccuracies over time. Correct answer is D. Proceed with the chatbot implementation immediately, relying on existing data anonymization protocols, and assuming the AI's learning capabilities will self-correct any inaccuracies over time. Explanation. This scenario is professionally challenging because Telstra, as a telecommunications provider, operates within a highly regulated environment in Australia. Decisions regarding the implementation of new technologies, especially those involving customer data or network infrastructure, must rigorously adhere to Australian consumer law, telecommunications regulations, and privacy legislation. The challenge lies in balancing the potential business benefits of a new system against the risks it might introduce, ensuring that customer trust and regulatory compliance are not compromised. The correct approach involves a comprehensive risk assessment that prioritizes the identification, evaluation, and mitigation of potential harms to customers and the business, aligned with Telstra's obligations under Australian law. This includes assessing risks related to data privacy, Privacy Act 1988, Service Reliability, Telecommunications Act 1997, and Consumer Protection, Australian consumer law. A thorough assessment ensures that any proposed solution is not only cost-effective, but also legally sound and ethically responsible, safeguarding Telstra's reputation and its license to operate. An incorrect approach that focuses solely on immediate cost savings without adequately assessing the associated risks would fail to meet regulatory requirements. For instance, overlooking potential data breaches or service disruptions could lead to significant penalties under Australian privacy and telecommunications laws, as well as reputational damage and loss of customer confidence. Similarly, an approach that prioritizes speed of deployment over thorough security testing might expose Telstra and its customers to vulnerabilities, violating the duty of care expected of a major service provider. Another incorrect approach might be to assume that existing risk mitigation strategies are sufficient without a specific review for the new technology, which could lead to unforeseen compliance gaps and operational failures. Professionals should employ a structured risk management framework. This involves clearly defining the scope of the assessment, identifying all potential risks, technical, operational, legal, ethical, and reputational, analyzing the likelihood and impact of each risk, and developing appropriate mitigation strategies. This process should be iterative and involve input from relevant stakeholders, including legal, compliance, and technical teams, to ensure a holistic and robust evaluation before any significant investment or deployment.